So I'm going to talk to you about the invasion of a carnivorous plant across Europe. So the plant I'm talking about is Sarracenia purpurea, which is a pitcher plant. So first of all, what are invasive species? So species traditionally have what we call a native range. So they're an area that they are normally found in. So for example, I've made up a species of tree that lives in North America. And if, say, that species was moved to North America, we would say that it's been moved into a non-native range. And some species, once they're introduced into that non-native range, can do really well and actually spread slowly across this new area. This is a key factor of invasive species. So invasive species, once they are introduced, do tend to dominate the area that they are in and actually can cause damage and harm to some of the native species that are present in the site that they're introduced to. But how do they actually get there? So one traditional way that they get there is through the movement of humans and goods across the world. So this is a video of some trade routes around the world, covering things from food to plastics to clothing and all miscellaneous. So here you can see some trade routes from the UK. So you can see that we trade with Europe quite a lot, China and North America. So the stronger these lines, the stronger the trade between these countries actually is. And here we have the trade routes that are going on around the world. You can really see that there are a lot of things that are actually being moved continuously around the world from countries, and a lot of really clear, strong trade routes. And to really emphasize this, this is a screenshot that I took last week of a marine website where it shows you all the ships that are currently moving around the world. So all the green and the red ships are related to trade, so cargo and tankers. And this to me was really quite surprising. So I never really think about how much is actually being moved around the world, especially when you think about the time that we're in now, so where movement around the world is actually restricted at the moment, but you can see how much is still being moved. So with this, you can kind of imagine deliberate and accidental movement of species. So whether it's something that's latched onto a boat, so an aquatic species that might become introduced into a new area, or whether it's plant seeds that are taken for a purpose and then escape later on. So here we have some examples of invasive species. So on the left, we have the classic grey squirrel that was introduced into the UK and outcompeted and displaced our native red squirrels. And then on the right, we have Himalayan balsam, which is a plant species that I think probably most of you would have heard of because it's a really tricky one to get rid of once it's in place. And as you can see, it grows really, really quickly and really kind of dominates and restricts our native plants. And this can be really problematic in various different ways, but things like flooding are actually influenced by this because it's changing habitats that it's in. And other things like railways are affected because a lot of plant species that become invasive were spread traditionally through railways when they were just moving plant seed and things escaped and grew. But invasive species are actually the second largest threat to biodiversity around the world. So when they're out competing on native species, they're really damaging the habitats that they can be introduced to. And they're actually the second largest threat, only behind habitat loss itself. And other problems with this is actually a monetary value as well. So invasive species are really costly to deal with. So in 2017, the UK government spent around £2 billion trying to control invasive species around the UK. So not only are they really bad ecologically, but they are also quite costly to us as well. So the species that I work with is called Sarracenia purpurea, but it's also known as the purple pitcher plant. But as you can see, it comes in a variety of different colours, so it's not always the greatest way of describing it. But this is a carnivorous pitcher plant. So it has a leaf that curls round and forms a pitcher, and this basically holds a body of water inside the leaf, as you can see in this one here. This pitcher then attracts, traps and digests insects' prey. So around the opening of the pitcher itself here, it has little nectaries. So very similar to how a flower attracts pollinators, this carnivorous plant has used that function to actually attract its insect prey. And then once the insects fall into the pitchers, they have downward facing hairs, so the insects can't crawl out, basically. So it's a very, very clever plant that has evolved these really cool techniques for being effective in trapping and digesting this prey. And they intend to inhabit these bog peatland areas. So if you've ever been on a walk and you've ended up in a really mossy, wet place, probably actually full of carnivorous plants that you just probably haven't seen. But yeah, so they tend to inhabit those kind of areas. So it's actually native to North America, and it lives along the east coast of the US. And then as it goes further north, it comes inland a bit into North US and into Canada. Now this is the most northern pitcher plant, and that is mainly linked to its ability to deal with frost and cold. So in the winter, in Canada, you can find this plant in like really thick frozen ice, which is pretty unique in plants that it can come back and survive after that. But one thing to note about the actual populations of this plant is that because it's in those bog areas, these habitat types have become really fragmented. So each of those habitat locations is really far away from one another. So natural dispersal of the plant. So when the plant produces seed, the seed can't move to a new location very easily because the next suitable habitat is actually really far away. And this is through a variety of different reasons, but quite strongly human impact as well. So in North America, it has been introduced into a variety of different locations. So the map you can see here is a map that I've made of what I've deemed as suitable habitat that the plant could live in. So you're seeing bogs, fens, water bodies that have vegetation around them that could potentially support this species. And as you can see, the introductions seem to be in little clusters, and this is, I think, largely related to the fact that each of these introductions is linked to a human physically putting that plant there. So as I said earlier, the dispersal is really terrible because there's or the habitat is so fragmented that it can't naturally move. So yeah, you kind of see these clusters of where people have actually brought them in. So what do I actually want to know? And why do we care about this? In its introduced range, the purple pitcher plant is actually said to become invasive. So it's not a traditional invasive plant. In fact, because it's in those fragmented habitats, it can't move between them. But once it's introduced into a single site, it can dominate that site. So because it's, as you can see here, quite a large plant, and what you're seeing here is actually a plot where they've kept it and then removed it from around the edges. It will just spread and dominate and outcompete all the other plants that are there. So it's doing really well in North America, and we're struggling to control it and spending time and money, especially in the UK, in containing it and actually removing it. Contrast that to its native land in North America. It's actually an endangered species in parts of the US. So they're spending money and time trying to keep this plant and preserve it. So it's a very big contrast of what's happening in two locations, which when you're doing field work and you're emailing people in the UK and America, you have to be very careful who you talk to, because in America, you have to promise not to harm the plant and you'll look after it. And then in the UK, I'm begging them not to remove it until after I've finished studying with it. So that's always a fun one. So what factors are important and what am I actually going to look at? So I want to compare the native lamb with the introduced range in Europe and determine if there are any key differences to help figure out why it's being so successful in Europe when it's struggling in North America. And that's where my species distribution modeling will come in. So I'm going to put in different variables and see what it kind of pulls out as trends as to what might be significant. So things that are going in are habitat types, so whether they're in bogs, fens, And then different climatic variables. So we've got average temperature, precipitation, that kind of thing. And then I'm actually going to throw in some human impacts as well. So distance to roads, cities, which could show disturbance and actual access, which might tell us about why they were put in the locations they were included in. So what have I found so far? So habitat type for North America and Europe appear to be quite similar. The phrasing is a little bit different, but it's just because differences in UK and kind of American dialogue really, but the actual type of habitat seems to be quite similar, which is to be expected because carnivorous plants have quite a specific need in habitat type. So they need lots of light, low nutrients and lots of water, which does limit the habitat type that they can survive in. And here you're seeing a map that was pulled out of one of my models. But as it comes for climatic differences, what we have been seeing initially is that the populations in Europe have a lower level of precipitation than the ones in North America, which is to be expected. They're a lot more farther north in North America. And then temperature, we're actually sitting at the higher end of the temperature range in North America. So this is kind of showing that the European ones are sitting within this small niche, and maybe this small niche is actually the more suitable habitat or suitable climatic type of range for this plant. So it could be suggesting that if we can identify the populations in North America that are also sitting within this range, they may be the ones that are best to kind of look at for conservation and restoration, which is some exciting new steps for me. So just to wrap up a little bit, the European populations are sitting within a subset of the climatic range in North America. One little discussion point that I haven't mentioned, whereas habitat type is similar in Europe compared to North America, we tend to have a little bit more low-lying vegetation. So if you think of a peatland bog, it's just flat. There's just moss and it's just mainly just flat. Whereas in North America, they used to rely a lot more on fires to burn the vegetation down because they tend to be around more open water bodies. So maybe this is a difference that we need to explore a little bit more as well. And finally, carnivorous plants, pretty cool. I think I always like to end with a little plug of that because they tend to be a little bit forgotten in the ecological world, and they are really, really interesting and cool. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions, to happily answer.